journalist pushed too far, but Barron Trump's poised response turned the tables in the most surprising way. The air in Washington, D.C. was thick with anticipation. Inside the expansive hall of the Kennedy Center, cameras flashed and voices hummed in an excited symphony. It was a public event hosted by a renowned arts foundation, with guests ranging from political figures to A-list celebrities. The atmosphere was formal but electric, a stage perfectly set for unexpected drama. Among the crowd, Melania Trump stood out, not just for her elegance, but for her quiet presence that seemed to carry the weight of years in the public eye. Dressed in a tailored white suit, she moved gracefully through the room, offering polite smiles and brief conversations. For Melania, such appearances were nothing new. Yet tonight felt different, tenser, perhaps. Eyes followed her every move, and behind those eyes, judgments brewed. In the far corner, an ambitious journalist, known for their bold and often polarizing approach, spotted her. This wasn't just any journalist. They had a reputation for turning moments of vulnerability into headline-grabbing spectacles. And tonight they had their sights set on Melania. With their questions prepared, microphone in hand and a cameraman trailing closely, they began weaving through the crowd, determined to corner their target. But what neither Melania nor anyone else in the room anticipated was the role her youngest son, Barron Trump, would soon play in what was about to unfold. The night was just getting started, but no one could have predicted the storm brewing in the seemingly calm room. The Kennedy Center sparkled under the glow of its chandeliers, reflecting the grandeur of the evening. Guests mingled in clusters, their laughter and chatter echoing softly against the high ceilings. Servers moved effortlessly through the room, balancing trays of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres, adding a touch of sophistication to the already polished atmosphere. Melania Trump, as always, commanded attention without trying. She carried herself with a poise that turned heads, but it wasn't her outfit or jewelry that captured people's focus. It was her composure. With each handshake and greeting, she exuded a calm confidence, a stark contrast to the buzzing energy of the crowd. Not far from her stood Barron Trump, taller than many adults in the room and visibly growing into his own. At just 18, he carried himself with a maturity that often surprised those around him. While his mother engaged in conversations, Barron stayed close, scanning the room like a protective shadow. He wasn't one to seek attention, but anyone who noticed him couldn't help but sense an understated presence. Across the room, the journalist, known for their sharp critiques and on-the-spot interrogations, saw their opportunity. They had been waiting for a chance to challenge someone of Melania's stature, and this was their moment. Gripping their microphone tightly, they nodded to their cameraman to follow as they inched closer to their target. With every step, their determination grew. The energy in the room remained lively, but an undercurrent of tension was beginning to ripple through. As the journalist moved in, Melania was speaking with a small group of event organizers when the journalist made their move. With the microphone poised and a camera rolling, they approached her as if they were just another guest looking to engage in conversation. But their intentions became clear the moment they opened their mouth. "Mrs. Trump," they began, their voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Your time as First Lady was marked by controversy. Some critics say you stayed silent on issues that mattered most to the American people. Do you believe you fulfilled your role?" The question, thinly veiled as polite, had barbs hidden within it. Conversations in the room faltered as people began to tune in, their attention drawn by the journalist's sudden audacity. Melania paused, her expression calm but guarded. She was no stranger to public scrutiny, and her years under the spotlight had taught her how to maintain composure. Still, the pointed question demanded a response, and the journalist wasn't about to let the moment go without pushing further. "You've often been criticized for not speaking out against your husband's policies," they pressed. "Do you feel that your silence contributed to the division in this country?" The camera zoomed in, capturing every nuance of her reaction. The journalist's tone wasn't loud, but it was firm, designed to put her on the defensive. A murmur began to spread through the room as attendees exchanged uneasy glances. Some whispered, others craned their necks to get a better view of the unfolding scene. Melania opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say a word, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Is this really the right time or place for that kind of question?" It was Barron, standing tall. His tone was calm, yet assertive. He stepped forward, placing himself between his mother and the journalist. The room went still as all eyes turned to him. The journalist hesitated for a moment, but their expression suggested they weren't backing down just yet. This was far from over. The journalist turned to face Barron, momentarily caught off guard. It was clear they hadn't expected the young adult to step in, let alone with such quiet authority. Barron stood firm, his gaze steady but respectful. For someone his age, he exuded an unusual composure, and his words carried a weight that silenced the whispers around the room. "Excuse me," he continued, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "My mother has spent years being judged, criticized, and misunderstood. Tonight, she's here to support a cause, not to defend herself against loaded questions." The journalist recovered quickly, smirking slightly as they adjusted their stance. "I appreciate your input, Barron," they replied, their tone condescending. "But these are valid questions. The public has a right to know." "To know what?" Barron interrupted, his voice rising just enough to command attention without sounding aggressive. "That you think ambushing someone at an event meant to celebrate art and culture is good journalism? If your questions were truly about the public interest, you'd schedule an interview, not corner her in a room full of strangers." A ripple of approval spread through the crowd. People began nodding and murmuring in agreement. The journalist glanced around, clearly aware that the tide was turning, but Barron wasn't done. "My mom has been criticized for staying silent, but have you ever asked why she chooses to speak the way she does? She doesn't need to yell or point fingers to make an impact. Maybe if you listened instead of trying to provoke her, you'd learn something." The journalist opened their mouth to respond, but found no words. The room had shifted entirely in Barron's favor. The weight of his words hung in the air like a gavel striking at the end of a trial. The journalist's confidence faltered, but the night wasn't finished yet. The aftermath of Barron's bold defense would carry its own story. For a moment, the room stood frozen in silence, save for the faint hum of the camera still recording. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the tension broke. A wave of applause rippled through the crowd, starting with a few tentative claps that quickly gained momentum. People turned to one another, some smiling, others nodding in approval of Barron's unexpected stand. Melania, who had remained quiet through the exchange, placed a hand gently on her son's shoulder. Her expression was one of quiet pride. Though she said nothing, she didn't need to. Barron's words had spoken volumes. The journalist, however, looked anything but triumphant. They glanced at their cameraman, who was still filming, then back at Barron. It was clear they hadn't anticipated the young Trump's calm, yet razor-sharp rebuttal. Any further attempt to press their point would likely backfire now. Still, they managed a weak smile and a parting comment. "Well, Barron, you certainly have your mother's poise. Perhaps we'll hear more from you in the future." But the damage was done. The journalist's attempt to seize the moment had been flipped entirely. The crowd, now buzzing with energy, seemed more interested in discussing Barron's eloquence than any of the questions that had been asked. A few attendees approached Barron and Melania, offering words of support and admiration. "You handled that brilliantly," one man said, shaking Barron's hand. "Your mom must be so proud." Barron accepted the compliments graciously, but his expression remained humble. He wasn't looking for attention or applause. To him, defending his mother was simply the right thing to do. Yet, as the night wore on, the moment began to take on a life of its own, spreading beyond the walls of the Kennedy Center. By the time the event concluded, the incident had already begun making its rounds on social media. Clips of Barron's response circulated rapidly, shared by attendees who had captured the exchange on their phones. News outlets picked up the story, and by morning the headlines were impossible to miss. Barron Trump defends Melania in viral moment. Young Trump silences journalist with poised response. Family loyalty shines in heated exchange. Comment sections in online forums lit up with discussions. Some praised Barron for his maturity and eloquence, while others questioned the journalist's decision to target Melania at such an event. What stood out most, however, was the overwhelming admiration for the bond between mother and son. People from all walks of life found themselves relating to the moment, not as a political spectacle, but as a testament to the universal value of family loyalty. Meanwhile, at home, Melania and Barron were trying to process the sudden flood of attention. For Melania, this was nothing new. She'd weathered countless media storms during her time as First Lady, but for Barron, the spotlight was unfamiliar and admittedly a little uncomfortable. Sitting in their living room in Palm Beach, he glanced at his phone, scrolling through the endless stream of supportive messages. "You didn't have to do that," Melania said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady but tinged with emotion. Barron looked up, his expression calm but resolute. "Mom, I couldn't just stand there and let them treat you like that. You've done so much for me, for all of us. They need to know the real you." Her eyes glistened, though she quickly blinked the tears away. "Thank you," she said simply, but the weight of those words hung in the air like a warm embrace. But beyond their private moment, the world continued to react. And Barron's defense of his mother was about to spark an even bigger conversation. The story of that night at the Kennedy Center didn't just fade away, it sparked a broader conversation about respect, the role of the media, and the strength of family bonds under the glare of the public eye. Barron's calm defense of his mother reminded people that, behind the titles and headlines, public figures are human too. For weeks, the clip was replayed across news channels and social media platforms, becoming a symbol of standing up for what's right, even in the face of pressure. Commentators debated the ethics of the journalist's approach, while others applauded Barron for his composure and wisdom beyond his years. But for Barron and Melania, the moment was about more than public perception. It was a private affirmation of their bond, a reminder that no matter how chaotic or unforgiving the world could be, family stood as a shield against the storm. As the media frenzy slowly died down, Barron returned to his life, trying to steer clear of the spotlight. Yet, in his quiet moments, he understood the significance of what had happened. It wasn't about proving the journalist wrong or earning applause. It was about honoring the values his parents had instilled in him: respect, loyalty, and courage. Sometimes the simplest actions can send the strongest messages. And in a world often divided by noise and judgment, Barron's moment of grace was a reminder of the power of standing up, not just for family, but for decency and respect. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of what truly matters.